The natural world is complicated. The water, the weather, plants, animals, all are influenced by countless variables over millions of years that help guide their behavior. Now, what we do know is, for the most part, living things are a product of their environment. They've evolved over time with the species around them. They know the rules, they know the players, and they found ways to coexist. When an invasive species comes into play, things change.
When we think about introduced species that arrive somewhere, we're often worried about that they break the rules of the game. The checks and balances that you have is being broken by species that arrive without their suite of natural predators or diseases. So then they can outcompete a lot of the native species, become super abundant, and create ecological or economic problems.
The big problem with invasive species, particularly invasive plants, their definition, by definition, they are non-native plants, so they're coming from someplace else, which means any of the insects here have never seen them before, that they don't have the adaptations to be able to get around their particular chemical defenses. And the other part of the definition of an invasive plant is that it's aggressively displacing native plants. So you have a plant, and around here it's typically from Asia, from China, that is aggressively pushing out the plants that are now supporting the wildlife around us. They look like plants, they look like they're contributing to the local ecosystem, but almost nothing can eat them.
So there's lots of different ways that invasive species can end up here. Of course, there's a lot of unintentional hitchhikers that maybe, come over on a cargo ship or come over on the wooden pallets that are holding a lot of our goods. But there's also a lot of intentional introductions. We might order these in over the internet. You might want like a new tropical fish or some interesting aquatic plants for your aquarium, for example. But what happens when you can no longer take care of it or you need to move? In many cases, a lot of times these get dumped into a local water body. Now you've introduced a new fish species or a new plant species that can easily take over because that lake or that water body is not adapted to that new species.
Invasive species are not new, and some are pretty famous. There's the cane toads that took over Australia, the snake that ate all the birds in Guam. There's a war on carp, a fish that walks,
It's got dagger-like teeth, a monstrous appetite, it even walks on land.
a plant that burns,
A plant called giant hogweed, an invasive species that contains skin-burning sap.
It was hard to imagine you could have a scarier name than killer bees, until murder hornets. But most invasive species aren't obvious. They look like they belong. A plant you've seen by the road, or another bug in your house. But look deeper, and you'll start to see why they are a big problem. And they have to be stopped.
Not all introduced species become invasive. The vast majority of them will just stay benign because very often we have a form of biological control that's not human intended, but it exists just out there. There are predators, generalists that will take out a certain species. Not all insects that are introduced are problematic. Not all plants, the vast majority of them that are introduced are not problematic. It's a few that escape those limitations that we have.
These limitations are the key. Invasives that lack biological controls can take advantage of a new environment. An environment where they essentially have free rein. So what does happen when these natural controls are taken out of the equation? To answer that, it might help to ask a local.
So you can think even about a native species, and a good example may be deer. They were under control by mountain lions and wolves and bears when Europeans arrived. One of the things that they did to protect their livestock is they were taking out the big predators. Initially, there were enough hunters out there to shoot for subsistence, but now that has declined, and deer have responded in the way that they always have, having fawns, and they grow in their populations, and now the biological controls, the organisms that were eating them before, are no longer there. But it's not the responsibility of the deer. Deer just do what deer do. It's our responsibilities because we took the biological controls away.
It's all about maintaining balance among what we call trophic levels. You have plants, you have the things that eat plants, then you have the things that eat those plant eaters. So plants, herbivores, predators. In the case of the deer's an herbivore. It eats plants, but we've taken away its predators. So it explodes. There's nothing to control it other than cars, and that's not a good control measure. Don't have as many people hunting as we did anymore, so people get mad at the deer, but it's not the deer's fault. It's our heavy hand of humans that are fooling around with the natural balance between trophic levels that has always kept things chugging along in a balanced way.
Deer are not an invasive species, but they do show how easily certain species can take over when this natural balance is disrupted. If a native species like deer can dominate when just a few of their biological controls are taken away, what can happen when an invasive arrives with none of them? But as with most things in life, location matters. Releases from the exotic pet trade in the 1980s led to the massive Burmese python population in the Florida Everglades. They landed in the perfect wetland habitat, with a deep menu of prey that was totally unprepared to defend themselves. If the pythons were released in a colder northern climate, it's safe to say that they would not be thriving. That's why when talking about invasive species, it's best to do it at a micro level. Take New York, for example, home to the largest shipping port on the East Coast and one of the most visited cities in the world. The state is a hotbed for invasive species, and they've made it a point to fight back.
Here in New York, we're lucky to have a lot of amazing ecosystems. We have the marine ecosystems along Island, we have the Great Lakes, we have the high peaks up in the Adirondacks. And so there's lots of different habitats for different species to be able to find their niche and become established. So there's a lot to protect, but also a lot that makes us vulnerable. So in response to having all these unique regions and unique approaches to invasive species, New York State decided to intentionally divide the state up into these 8 partnerships for regional invasive species management, something that we call the PRISMs, and so that those regions could deal with the invasive species that are unique to those regions. And it's worked really well. You know, it's kind of gotten these invasive species issues into the hands of those people who really know the landscape well.
This comprehensive approach to invasive species forms the bedrock of New York's strategy. Partnering these local PRISMs with other nonprofits and universities ensures that every region is accounted for and no stone is left unturned.
We talk a lot about the ecological impacts, the negative impacts for biodiversity that invasive species has, and I think people often think that's the nature lover's problem or that's the scientist's problem. But actually, invasive species do impact our daily lives.
For a state known for its city, New York has a lot of trees. Over 60% of the state is forest, a whopping 18.9 million acres. Forests provide oxygen, habitat, protect our water, and on top of all that, New York trees are responsible for tens of billions of dollars towards the economy, which is an issue when something out there won't stop killing them.
The groan of chainsaws echoes along the Southern State Parkway as hundreds of trees are being chopped down and thousands will soon follow. The culprit, Asian longhorned beetles that leave trees riddled with holes, killing them from the inside out.
When it comes to bugs, you know, they're good at what they do. There's a bug in Niagara County still hanging around, and it's leaving behind a trail of devastation.
The landscape here is slowly being wiped out.
The emerald ash borer.
The emerald ash borer.
This tiny bug is eating its way through trees and destroying landscapes.
Devastation. I mean, it's truly terrible. Western New York has changed.
Trees are falling. We've had 5 trees total fall.
Fall because the emerald ash borer beetle has now invaded many of the ash trees in Amherst.
Ash become dangerous as they die. They tend to break apart in large chunks, which could hurt somebody. And so we want people to be aware that this problem is out there.
But the beetle could also end up killing the town budget because of the cost to remove the dead wood.
We're probably talking into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So I think most people think of anything that would eat a tree would be a pest. And you know, I guess to a certain extent you could consider that. But then if you look at native insects that eat trees, they actually perform a very valuable service to the tree population by taking out the weakened individuals from the reproductive pool. There's no regulation of the invasive populations. They leave their predators behind where they came from. And so those invasive insects then are capable of taking out whole species of trees or whole genera of trees. It's just something that 40 years ago when I got into the business I never thought was possible. Ash trees are actually, I think, underappreciated tree in New York State. It's perhaps we think about maybe 1/10 of the hardwood forest as ash. When you have forest pests like the emerald ash borer, what they do is they get into under the bark of the tree and they kill the tree by eating the bark, eating the inner bark of the tree. But in the meantime, what they do is they rest over the winter time in that bark. And so if you see your tree, it's dead, and you cut it down and you want to use it for firewood, if you transport that firewood someplace, however many miles away, and you leave it, the bugs will then emerge in the spring and they'll be there and they're going to look for more new trees to attack. And indeed, many of the instances that I think we've found new infestations of emerald ash borer in New York State, we feel were caused by people bringing firewood into their campgrounds. Ash is actually far more prominent in areas where humans are present. They hide around our infrastructure. So the big impact of emerald ash borer is that it kills trees that are right near our homes, our power lines, our roads. The issues are huge. It's not just a tree dying in the woods. It impacts humans tremendously. And that's why I think we really need to look very carefully at not only emerald ash borer, which is running wild now through the state, but what's the next one coming in? And you know, we have to think more carefully that it might actually be wise to spend a little bit of time in prevention, time and money, rather than incur the incredible expense of dealing with the impacts later.
We bought this site in 2007 and opened a winery here in 2010. So, best grape for this area is probably Cabernet Franc and Chardonnay, but a lot of other things do fairly well, or very well most years. It's one of those things where you never knew how popular you were until you own a vineyard. First thing you notice, there's no lanternflies here. There's one right there, so we got one, but he's not going to be living too long. Every plant has a few on them. Some have more than a few, like this guy right here. Probably at the point where they stay on here for a couple weeks and this plant's probably going to be dead. So we can see that's a spotted lanternfly.
spotted lanternfly is showing just how destructive it can be.
They just keep moving in, and it looks like swarms of locusts. That's how heavy they come in here.
Says several dead lanternflies and one live one were found at a tree nursery in Deer Park. They say the bug arrived in a shipment from Pennsylvania, where the fly is most prevalent.
The spotted lanternfly feeds on the sugary sap of over 70 different plant species, including grapevines.
You know, they're just not very nice bug.
Yeah, New York State has been really watching the spotted lanternfly closely as it's been moving in from more southern states. This is something that was introduced just a few years ago to North America. And here in New York State, we have a lot of commodities at stake. So agriculture is a big example. We have, lots of wineries. They can go after grapevines, after tree fruits. And so those areas can be deeply impacted. It can, destroy the crop for that season for that farmer. And so that's a big economic impact.
There's a couple of vineyards south of here that lost most or all their grapevines. So some people quit. Other people decided to buy fruit from somewhere else and not replanting until they know how to take care of it. It's kind of like once you leave the genie out of the bottle, it's pretty hard to put it back in. So unless you get it stopped, it's going to be a problem for everybody.
So we're looking for spotted lanternfly, particularly the egg masses. They'll lay their egg masses on just about anything that sits outside for any period of time in a known infested area. They're shiny and gray, so we can pick them up pretty easily with the camera. I'm using a zoom camera, so I can fly pretty close and then zoom right in on anything that doesn't look quite right. This is basically the process, is trying to keep the aircraft steady over the trailer in the breeze. And you can see it moves back and forth a lot. So if there's anything really suspicious, we could always bring it back and look at it on the computer before we let the truck drive away. So I was interested in some of these dark spots, so you can see I zoomed the camera in just to get a better idea of their shape and color. They didn't really match for egg masses, so we can let the truck go.
Well, the issue is, and why we're going through all this trouble, is the economic impact and the impact to the state in terms of its tourism. You look at what's going on in Pennsylvania and the problems that they're having. We don't want to have that same issue here. So, prevention is worthwhile. If we can educate these guys about the impacts of spotted lanternfly, get them under compliance, that goes a long ways in terms of preventing it and also determining where it may be. One of these truck drivers, may be at their home later on and they may see spotted lanternfly. So the outreach that we do to them is also, critically important, not just for New York, but for other states, because they're coming in from all over the place.
It's time that you heard about any kind of invasive species quarantine and all that.
This is it.
First time I heard about it?
That's the first time ever. I'm going to give it to my boss, the pamphlet they gave me, and have them keep an eye out for it. I like my wine, so let's get this under control.
Getting invasive species under control is easier said than done, and it gets more difficult the longer that they are here.
Once an invasive species has been here and becomes established, it's really hard to get rid of. And so when we're thinking about being strategic, we think about things in the terms of this invasive species curve, where at the top end of the curve, that's when a species has been here, it's established, its population numbers are really high, and there's really no way to get rid of it completely. Really what we want to be doing is we want to be focusing on those bottom parts of the curve where, those populations are really low, we're detecting things early, have that good return on investment where we find something, we're able to stamp it out before it becomes established and becomes a big problem.
When it comes to detecting invasive species early, Sometimes it helps to get creative. And it never hurts to enlist a little help from a friend.
Today we are working with Dia, our conservation detection dog, and Josh, our handler, looking for Scotch broom. Scotch broom is a tier 2 invasive species in the lower Hudson, which means that it's emerging as an invader. It's not yet widespread. It's at low enough numbers that we actually have a chance of eradicating it. And Dia is one component of that effort to eradicate Scotch broom in the lower Hudson. They're in among other plants. It's harder for the humans to find visually. We use visual cues, and when it's among other plants, it's hard to find it. But the dogs can actually use a scent cue. We think we'll be able to progress a lot faster with the dog because she'll be finding plants when they're smaller, and we won't have to wait another year or 2 years before humans would be able to see those plants.
You know, what we see is that the dog is coming into what we call scent cones. And you could probably see from watching her, she'll be searching, and then you'll just kind of see this change in the position of her body, or her head will jerk and go back, and you'll see she kind of just has her nose down. She's sniffing around because the scent can get caught in little pockets in the grass or other trees, and then she's going and she can smell it, but she's trying to find basically the source of it, right? And so in certain circumstances there were a couple of plants together. So you see she's going, oh, this one, this one, this one, and this one is the one I'm going to indicate on. This is where the most scent is coming from.
10, 20 years ago, who would have thought that we'd have drones that we might be able to use for this kind of work? Yes, we knew that dogs could do search work, but who would have thought that we could have gone here? I don't think we can predict what we're going to have next, but I think we're always going to have invasive species, especially with a global world, and if we want to protect our native habitats, we're going to have tools and mechanisms that allow us to do that.
By using dogs, we're bringing awareness to this issue because, you know, people really, really love dogs. And so they see, oh, she's doing this. Well, what's she doing? She's looking for invasives? Oh, well, what are invasives? So it's also a good way for us to educate the public about what's going on and why this is an issue. And if we can attach the face of a dog to the program, that helps, you know, pick people's interest. There's nothing more than she loves than just running and smelling stuff. So I just feel like this is the perfect job for her. Yeah.
Unlike Dia, Brent Kynall and his invasive species prevention team cannot rely on their sense of smell. So they have to use a different method.
We're going to be surveying for southern pine beetle. So the southern pine beetle was first detected in this area in September of 2014. We began aerial surveys in December of 2014. And we conduct these surveys about 4 times a year. Then you guys do the on-the-ground management for that. So your job today will be a photographer. I'll be sketching polygons of new infestations if we see any, and I'll just let you know what side of the plane to be taking pictures out of as we fly. We'll probably fly for about 2 hours.
One of the telltale signs of a southern pine beetle infestation are the red tops of trees in the pine barrens, which is what the team is keeping an eye out for today.
South Fork and then the Central Pine Barrens region of Long Island.
So basically I'm just taking pictures of the landscape, and eventually if there's any like red top trees, and later on I'll go down and survey the area by ground so that I could identify exactly how many trees there are and how much we have to cut And then I have a tablet with aerial photograph on it, and I also have polygons of previous recordings from our aerial surveys, so I can see if there's any new infestations of the southern pine beetle out here.
Preventing and detecting invasives early is ideal, but it's not always possible. For aquatic invasive species, natural currents make their job easy. But when they have to move by land, they need to hitch a ride. The main way aquatic invasives are spread is from boaters traveling from one water source to another without inspecting or cleaning their boats. But what if the water is already connected?
Yeah, New York's played a special role in the introduction of water chestnut to North America because it was introduced close to Schenectady. And that was the first time that it was released, and now it has spread through major parts of the Northeast, and it's in the Great Lakes now. The big problem that we have with water chestnut is that it covers the surfaces and becomes an issue for boating, angling, all kinds of recreation. Of course, there are other ecological effects that go with a plant species that covers the water surface.
Invasive species is one of those huge environmental problems that people feel overwhelmed by. They just want to throw up their hands and say, we can't get rid of these species. They're here to stay. We keep getting more and more. There's nothing we can do about it. Obviously, we're never going to get rid of all invasive species, but there's a lot of opportunities through knowledge, through innovation, through new technology, and also through really looking at our policies and our actions and how they can prevent or not prevent new species introductions. There's a lot we can do, and so I think we need to focus on what we can do and not what we can't do.
So what we do is a situation where a plant has escaped its biological controls by being introduced in an area where those insects or diseases do not exist. We then go to the native range, study which ones are really specific to this particular plant, and then try to introduce them in safe ways to then allow the ecosystem to form this biological control concept again. So we're trying to recreate a success that we had with biocontrol for purple loosestrife when we study water chestnut and Phragmites insects. Last year was 25 years that we introduced 4 different insects to control purple loosestrife. We introduced insects that attack the roots, the leaves, and the flowers. Purple loosestrife used to be one of the most abundant wetland plants in New York. You could drive along the roadsides or on the thruway, and purple loosestrife used to be everywhere in big abundances. Now the plant starts flowering about 2 months later, and the populations have been reduced to much less of what it was.
Introducing more species on purpose may sound a little strange, but biological control efforts like these can be extremely effective and safe. Bernd and the team spend years testing in the lab before any introductions can begin. In the meantime, established invasives like water chestnut will continue to spread, and they need to be held in check. Until other control methods are proven, pulling the plants each year is one way to help give the native species a fighting chance.
What we typically do is we like to get the plants by the roots, because if you're not getting the whole plant mass, you're not doing an effective job. So you get in, grab the roots, grab the whole plant, any fragments that break off of it. We like to do that, get in, get the whole thing, and then repeat and go over and over again on the patch to slowly knock it down each time. As you can see here, this is 46 bags worth, and this was just a cleanup swim after the initial patch pick. The first day we picked 150 bags, so right now, 2 days of picking, we have over 200 bags of milfoil, and that's just the first patch, and now we're working on the second one. I have a camp on Lake Bomazine in Vermont, and the only effort that's happening in that lake that I know of is the harvesters. And they go in and they essentially give the milfoil haircut. Now, I've been at that lake since I was 8 years old, and then till now, there's significant amounts of milfoil everywhere. Our entire channel, there's huge patches throughout the lake, and when you don't get a good hold on the milfoil, it chokes out all the other natives. So all the plants that are needed by the native fish and all the species that are living in the water, they need those native plants. Now the milfoil, it grows rapidly faster than any of the natives, and it would be a shame if that happened to a lake like this.
So the invasive species curve, as that species is starting to grow in abundance, so say it's been introduced, it's starting to get established. Early on in that establishment, if we can catch a new population early, then we actually have a chance to eradicate it, to get rid of it from the landscape.
When we're facing invasive species, we basically have two choices. We can accept the consequences, or we can do something about it.
Over the years, I was able to witness how Japanese knotweed is able to take over an entire river corridor, because it happened right in my backyard, pretty much. And when I came up here to start working, I realized that the knotweed infestations that we still have are very small, and we have a lot of river miles here to protect. So these infestations that are just starting on these rivers are really important to address, because if we don't, we could lose a lot of these very scenic and economically important river corridors that are here in the park.
Japanese knotweed is a large herbaceous shrub that grows in very tall and dense stands.
Yeah, so if you have knotweed in your backyard, that's something that you really want to keep an eye on. It can, of course, take over quite a bit of your lawn, but as it starts getting close to the house structure, knotweed can actually grow into the foundation. It can cause a lot of problems to buildings. And actually in England, you're not able to get a mortgage for your house unless you've actually addressed the Japanese knotweed that's growing there in your yard.
Many people had looked at this property before I had, and everyone decided not to buy it. And a part of that was because of the Japanese knotweed. I would say there was about 3/4 to 1 acre of knotweed just standing right behind me, all the way up to the driveway and the stream. Part of it was maybe 10 feet high in sections, and it was dense. It was very dense. You could walk through it. It was like Jurassic Park, I would say, back there. One of my concerns, given the proximity of the Japanese knotweed to the house, is that it can grow into the cracks and crevices of the foundation and start to break up the actual structural integrity of the house. And I didn't want to allow that to happen to my property.
So the main way we treat or manage Japanese knotweed when it's too large to dig up is through a process called stem injection. So the way the stem injection process works is we use a stem injection gun with a short hardened needle, and we inject a select amount of herbicide down near the base of each one of the canes. We also have these marking pens on our stem injection gun that mark each one of the canes as we're injecting them so that we can keep track of where we've been and we don't over-treat the site.
The hemlock woolly adelgid is actually this teeny tiny little aphid-like thing, and there are only females in North America. There's no males, and that's the really dangerous aspect of their biology, because all you need is one individual to settle on a tree, and you got a whole new population developing. So the hemlock woolly adelgid, this little tiny thing, probably came over to North America on nursery stock in the early 1900s, and it got going in the Richmond, Virginia area, got into the Appalachian Mountains, and spread from the Appalachians north into New York State.
We did not anticipate finding this adelgid here, and yeah, developed a plan over the course of a couple months, and here we are.
2017, we found hemlock woolly adelgid at the Potterkill, which was in Schenectady County, and then that same year we found it at Prospect Mountain in the Adirondack Park. And since then, Anchor Diamond is one of the only places that we've found it in between. So we've yet to have any more detections in the Adirondacks. And so, as Spencer said before, this is the most northern point at which we found it since the Prospect Mountain find. So we're in like early detection, rapid response mode. You know, hemlock woolly adelgid isn't as well established up at this northern front yet. So we're trying to knock back populations with pesticides to try to prevent it from becoming more established. Hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive insect from Asia, and it attaches itself to the base of hemlock needles and basically sucks the juice out of the plant.
When hemlocks die off, it's an ecosystem altering process. It affects every facet of that ecosystem.
Hemlocks are often found along streams, you know, steep slopes or, you know, shady slopes along streams, and it uptakes all the water coming from agricultural systems, so it sucks up polluted water and prevents it from reaching the streams or the rivers.
This is something that I've been thinking about. I love to fish, and we have these native brook trout that are amazing. And the hemlocks, I think, are incredibly important at maintaining the low temperatures which the brook trout require for the reproduction.
It's been well established in North America for quite some time. And in the southern states, in the Appalachian Mountains, it's had quite an impact. The chemical treatments sort of act as like a short-term strategy while we wait for longer-term strategies to take effect. So we have a partnership with Cornell University, and the DEC has funded a biocontrol lab at Cornell whose objective is to rear the predators of hemlock woolly adelgid. And the idea is we want to treat as much as we can until the biocontrol is a more feasible option. Like ready, set, go?
Yeah. Go.
Managing invasives is an expensive task. With all the resources and money invested in fighting back, it comes at no surprise that some question whether or not this is all worthwhile.
A number of people that have challenged the notion that we have to get rid of our invasive species, or at least fight them, have several points. One is that they will say there have been no extinctions caused by invasive plants on continents. There have been extinctions on islands. I guess that doesn't count, but on continents, no extinctions, and therefore they're not bad. I have a problem with that, because since when is extinction the only measure of a problem? That's like only going to a doctor when you're dead.
Very often I just hear, or let nature take its course. That's not happening after we mucked it up. So for deer, for example, say let nature take its course, but taking out the predators. There's no wolves, no mountain lions, whatever the factors that control deer at some point, and then say let the change nature that we change take course. That's not the responsible way to interacting with our environment. We created the change, so we are responsible for that.
It has been argued that When you add an invasive species to North America, for example, you're increasing species diversity. And on a continental scale, that is true. We now have 3,300 more plant species existing in North America than we used to have because of invasive plants. But diversity and ecosystems function at the local level, not at the continental scale. So you have to look at ecosystem function in the appropriate scale. A lot of people wonder how long it takes a plant that from someplace else that has been here to actually become a native plant. That's a good question. That's a good question. The answer is it takes an awful long time. A plant becomes a native when it acts like the natives that have been here essentially forever. And we can look what a plant's evolutionary potential is when it's interacting with other organisms by seeing what it does where it came from. So let's talk about the common reed Phragmites. It was used as packing material in the earliest ships from Europe. The invasive genotype we have is from Europe. So the ships docked and they threw all the Phragmites out on shore. So there are some populations of Phragmites in the east that have been here 400 years. You would think that's long enough to start acting like a native. Well, if we go to Europe and we measure the number of insects that are eating Phragmites in Europe, it's 170 species. So that plant is contributing to local ecosystems, it's maintaining biodiversity, all seems to be in balance. When we look at how many insects have adapted to Phragmites here, after 400 years, it's 5 species. So adaptation is happening, but it's very slow. How long will it take Phragmites to act like the natives it's displaced? I don't know, we can only guess, but you're talking about thousands of years, probably hundreds of thousands of years. And in the meantime, the relationships that used to be here have disappeared where Phragmites is.
So when I first started working for the Heritage Program, I went on one of the trips to help our state botanists look for some of the rare plants that had been growing and had been documented in the salt marsh tidal creek systems in the Peconic River area on Long Island. And so I was really excited to be able to see these rare plants that had been assessed many years ago. But once we got there, we realized that this site had been completely overgrown by Phragmites. And it was, very heartbreaking to see because we knew that those rare plants that we were there to look for really didn't have a chance within this big, dense patch of the invasive species.
It's also been said that another word for invasion is change. True enough, ecosystems change a lot. The question is, do they change for the better or for the worse? When an invasive species comes in, it doesn't only knock out one plant, it typically knocks them all out. If you look at a kudzu invasion, it's this blanket of kudzu, and all the plants that used to live there are now gone. Same thing with Phragmites, same thing with porcelain berry and autumn olive. They just blanket the area that they invade. So you're not losing one plant species, you're losing pretty much everything that used to live there. Nature is primarily made up of creatures, plants, and animals that have been interacting with each other for eons. And they have found the best way to interact is to develop specialized relationships with the plants and animals around them. So most of the creatures out there are specialists. What I think is the most important type of specialization is the relationship between the insects that eat plants and the plants themselves. So we can use the monarch butterfly as an example. It is a specialist on milkweeds. And it has had to specialize on milkweeds because milkweeds protect themselves. They've got cardiac glycosides and milky latex sap. Those are good repellents to other insects. But over the eons, the monarch has developed the physiological ability to store and excrete and detoxify cardiac glycosides, and they have behavioral adaptations that allow them to avoid contacting the sticky latex sap. So now they can eat milkweeds. But in developing all those specialized adaptations to milkweeds, they have not spent any time developing adaptations to eat the tannins that are in oak trees, or the cucurbitacins and cucurbids, or the nicotine in tobacco, and on and on. The monarch butterfly has actually done us a huge favor in the last 10 years or so by pretty much disappearing. Because what it's done is point out how important these specialized relationships are. When we take milkweeds out of our landscapes, we lose the monarch. So if you want a world with no butterflies, let's keep doing what we're doing. But if you want a world with butterflies, we've got to have the native plants that support them. Our invasive species are not going to do it.
Invasive species are here because of us. We're the one that brought this problem. We're the one that have carried them either on purpose or by accident from one country to another and introduced them into a new place where they were able to flourish and take over and cause us all kinds of economic, environmental, and health problems. But we're also part of the solution. We understand how they're getting here, and we need to take real action to prevent more from coming in. I know it seems like we have a lot now, but there's a lot more species that could be introduced if we don't act now and stop them from coming in.
One of the issues we have is that we humans have stopped thinking of ourselves as part of the natural world. We're something separate, and we've fallen into the trap of thinking we don't need the natural world. Well, in fact, we are very much a part of the natural world. We're a product of it, and we need it every single day. You may live in a city, but your clean water, your air, your food, your moderate weather systems, all of these things are produced by functioning ecosystems that all do better when they have a lot of species in them, and they all do more poorly when we take those species away. And that's what invasive plants are doing. They're reducing the number of species in our local ecosystems. Again, in so many cases, it's not necessary. We don't have to buy a plant from Asia that's going to become invasive and reduce our ecosystem productivity. The costs are enormous, and the benefits are comparatively few.
So right now it's all short term, just kill the bugs as they land on your plant. My feeling is I'm going to replant, and I think I can control the situation, and then I'll be ahead of everybody else when they got the answer to the problem, so if they get the answer to the problem.
So I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio, and that's one of the early states that had the emerald ash borer, which first popped up in Michigan. And so my parents still live at the same home that I grew up in, and we always had amazing trees all through the backyard. But over the last few years, my dad has been one by one having to cut down and remove all of our ash trees because the emerald ash borer has been killing those off.
So for me, I have a really hard time imagining what New York would be like without the hemlock trees. I think with forest insects, pests in general, it's like you don't know what you got till it's gone. And if you just go out in the woods and you don't really notice the hemlocks, I think now you need to sort of like think about that. Look over your shoulder and think, oh, this is a hemlock tree. What would it be like if it was gone? I think that it would be astounding to most people. And I do that all the time.
I don't live at the Ponderosa, but this year, like I said, I used to have a back lawn back here. When I first bought this property, it was bad. There was trees, we chopped down the trees and like that so I could make a lawn. And I kept it down for the longest time. This year I said, no more. I'm gonna see how bad it gets. And it got bad.
All of the life that we know about in the universe, and probably all the complex life that is out there, occurs in a thin little film called the biosphere on the surface of the Earth. And we've chopped up that biosphere and said, Tom owns this, Dick owns this, Harry owns this, and Mary owns this. Okay, that's done, but along with that ownership comes the responsibility of maintaining all of the life in the universe. That's an awesome responsibility. We've had a heavy hand in all of our ecosystems, so now we have to manage them so that they stay in balance, so that they remain productive. I think we can do that. 86% of the U.S. is privately owned east of the Mississippi. So you don't have to think about invasive species problems everywhere. Just think about the invasive problems on your property. If everybody controlled them on their own property, we'd be 86% done. So that's a much more manageable goal, and I think everybody does have the responsibility of addressing that.
As individuals and as humans, we tend to dominate ecosystems. We care for them, we bring species around, we enjoy them. That gives us incredible power. But I think it comes from Star Wars. With great power comes great responsibility. And that's what I take at heart, that it's our responsibility to The things that we did wrong, the things that we got wrong, whether they were intentionally or not, that we have it in our power to change some of the bad outcomes that we generate. And that's our responsibility. Does it come from Star Wars? Do you guys know? Spider-Man? Okay.
Here's what you can do to help stop the spread of invasive species. After using your watercraft, make sure you clean, drain, and dry. When hiking or camping, remember to clean off your equipment of dirt or any plant material. If you're using camp firewood, remember to buy it where you burn it and don't transport firewood. To learn more or report invasive species, visit imapinvasives.org. And for more information in general about invasive species, you can visit the DEC website or NYIS.info.
A great way that people can help is to get involved. We have these partnerships for regional invasive species management. Find out which PRISM you live in here in the state, and go to their partner meetings, sign up for their email listserv, and go to these volunteer days that they have. They have amazing people that are coming out to do control projects. They are going out and doing mapping projects. They're training people to be early detectors so that they can catch those invasive species when they're early on.
Aquatic invasive species are, for the most part, spread from lake to lake via the overland transport of boats and their trailers. To stop the spread of aquatic invasive species, there are some simple steps that people can take, and that is to make sure that their boat is clean, drain, and dry before entering a new water body. To clean your boat, you first look around the outside for any attached animals or plants, running your hand along the outside of the boat, feeling for any bumps which may be aquatic invasive animals. It's important to check the wheel well, the axle, and the wires attached to it running underneath the boat, as well as the brake lights and any other place where aquatic plants may catch as you pull the boat out of the water. So once you've collected all the aquatic plant material off the boat, you can dispose of them in the aquatic invasive species disposal station or in a garbage receptacle. The next step is to drain any standing water in your boat. First, pull your bilge plug to drain any water in your bilge. Next, lower your motor to allow the water to drain. Live wells should also be drained. Be sure to check your anchor for any attached mud or plants and clean that as well. The next step is to dry your boat. Make sure to allow it to sit out in the sun for at least 5 days. For smaller watercraft, another option is to towel dry.
Thank you for helping to stop the spread.